All right, in just a moment, Chief Robert J. Contee III of the Metropolitan Police Department will provide a briefing on yesterday's fatal officer-involved shooting incident that occurred in the 1300 block of Congress Street Southeast. As a reminder, MPD is in the preliminary stages of this investigation, and following the Chief's remarks, there will be an opportunity for you all to ask questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Robert J. Contee III, Chief of Police of the Metropolitan Police Department, and today I'm here to provide additional information about the officer-involved shooting that occurred yesterday evening in the 1300 block of Congress Street Southeast. But before I provide an update, I must acknowledge that the loss of any life in the District of Columbia is tragic for family and community. So please allow me to extend my condolences. Our suspect involved in this matter is identified as 30-year-old Mr. DeAndre Johnson. On October the 16th, just after 11 p.m., it was reported to MPD that Mr. Johnson allegedly assaulted a female victim by placing a firearm to her head and threatening her. MPD members seized a pistol with an extended magazine from a vehicle associated with Mr. Johnson following that assault. However, Mr. Johnson was not there, and therefore no arrest was made at that time. There is a prior history of domestic violence between Mr. Johnson and the female victim. Yesterday, at approximately 4:35 p.m., 7th District uniformed officers responded to an apartment in Congress Heights to serve Mr. DeAndre Johnson with a temporary protective order. While on scene, officers determined an arrest based on probable cause should be made for assault with a dangerous weapon gun, based upon the prior reporting. As officers entered the apartment, they engaged Mr. Johnson. He became aggravated that the police were called, and officers attempted to de-escalate the situation by positioning themselves between Mr. Johnson and the victim of the assault. One of the officers began to place Mr. Johnson in handcuffs. Mr. Johnson resisted, resulting in an intense physical struggle. During the struggle, the involved officer's body-worn camera became deactivated and then reactivated. During the struggle, an officer discharged their service weapon, firing 2 rounds that struck Mr. Johnson. I've had the opportunity to watch the body-worn camera footage from the officers on scene, and I've received an initial briefing from investigating officials. Based upon initial interviews, it was reported that Mr. Johnson grabbed one of the officer's firearm while in the holster. It can be heard on the body-worn camera, one officer stating, "He's got my," while almost simultaneously an officer discharged their weapon, striking Mr. Johnson in the back. Due to the positioning of the bodies during the struggle, the camera vantage is limited and does not clearly capture all aspects of the struggle. After securing the apartment, the involved officers provided life-saving efforts until DC Fire and EMS arrived and pronounced Mr. Johnson as deceased. The United States Attorney's Office will conduct an independent, complete, thorough, and fair criminal investigation into the matter. Following the USAO's review, MPD Internal Affairs Division then will conduct an internal administrative investigation. Pursuant to agency policy, the officers involved are placed on administrative leave. The MPD team, in coordination with the Department of Behavioral Health, is currently in communication with Mr. Johnson's family, sharing information and video footage, while also working to prepare the community briefing video for release under District of Columbia legislation. I can now take any questions you may have.
Was there a time that Mr. Johnson actually pulled the officer's gun from his holster?
Not that you can conclusively see on the video, no.
So there was a time when Mr. Johnson reached for the officer's gun but never had it in his possession?
That would be consistent with what is seen on the video, yes.
And Mr. Johnson didn't have a gun or a knife or any other weapon?
It does not appear. The only other piece of evidence that was recovered inside of the house, or one of the additional pieces of evidence that was recovered, was a magazine to a firearm, but it was no firearm recovered. That's correct.
And there were 3 officers on the scene involved in this operation.
That's correct.
And Mr. Johnson was the only suspect.
That's correct.
Do you think there were other things those officers could have done short of shooting him to settle this?
Well, it's really kind of hard to say at this point. The officers obviously engaged in de-escalation tactics. I think people will see that as they review the video. I do not have the vantage point of the officer who was involved to make that assessment. But I think that as we go through the investigation, based upon what's been reported, as the U.S. Attorney's Office conduct their piece, they'll be able to perhaps get closer to that answer to determine whether or not this is a criminal matter or an administrative matter for us to resolve. Any other questions?
Chief,
Yes, sir.
I think I heard you say that the officer fired his weapon almost simultaneously when you hear the words, "He's got mine." So when you said that, did you mean to say that the firing was not in response to those words, but maybe something that officer saw, but it wasn't in response to "He's got mine"?
It's very hard to say, because the officer who is saying "he's got my" is not the officer who's firing the weapon. It's a different officer. So it's hard for me to say what that officer saw as he was firing, but you have the one officer who's reporting that his weapon was grabbed. That officer you hear "he's got my," and it's very quick in the video. This really unfolds very, very rapidly once the struggle starts, and I think most people will see that when the body-worn camera video is released. It is very quick. While the involved officer who fired the shot, his camera was deactivated as a result of the struggle. The other 2 officers that were present on the scene, their cameras were not deactivated. But again, talking about positioning of the bodies as this incident, as the struggle unfold on the ground, it's very hard to see. There are certainly conclusions that that you may be able to try to draw based upon what's happening in the video, but there's nothing conclusive from the video that I've seen so far. Yes, sir.
Sir, did you or could you estimate the length of time the encounter was?
Less than a minute, probably. From the top point of the struggle, there was initial conversation once the officers arrived, as they engaged Mr. Johnson. They were trying to de-escalate the situation. Clearly, he was agitated at the presence of police inside of the apartment, and once it became clear that he was being placed under arrest, it unfolded very rapidly at that point.
And the woman who was the original victim of his assault a couple of days ago, she was in that apartment when all this happened, was she not?
That's correct.
And was their baby in the apartment?
I'm not sure the relationship, but there were children inside the apartment.
Was
That's
she harmed in any way?
no physical harm to the children.
Did she seek this protective order?
Say it again.
Did she seek the protective order?
Yes, the protective order was sought by the victim in this case, and MPD was called to the scene to execute that protective order on yesterday afternoon. Thank you.
One last thing, Chief. There's a suit that doesn't have anything to do with this case. Some cadets apparently have filed a harassment suit against the department. Are you aware of it? And what can you say about it?
I'm not aware of it. Any legislation, any legal suits or anything like that, obviously I would not be able to comment on, but I'm not familiar with the suit that's been filed by cadets. It's something we'll check into. Thank you.
Did you say that there were Department of Behavioral Health people on the scene, or just 3 officers?
The Department of Behavioral Health people were present with the family when we showed the video, not on the scene of this incident. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.